In the shadowed underbelly of the Roman Empire, where the marble gleamed cold under the torchlight and blood dried between the cobblestones, there lived a boy whose name has long since been forgotten but whose smile, grotesque and eternal, is etched into the forgotten veins of history. He was born on the fringes of Numidia, a place of dust and horned silence, where his mother, a seer, shunned by her village, red bones and coals, with a tongue sharpened by prophecy. His father, he was sold not for labor, but for spectacle, first as a cupbearer to Gaius Cassian, a minor noble with delusions of grandeur, and a villa that stank of wine, rot, and boredom, and with a dull ritual blade used for animal sacrifice carved deep into his cheeks, slicing upward until his mouth became a permanent grin. No anesthesia, no mercy, just iron, fire, and cruelty disguised as entertainment. Gaius was a collector of Greek statues, foreign perfumes, and beautiful boys. His face, once smooth and soft like olive wood, was now a grotesque mask of eternal joy. His tears, when they came, only deepened the wounds, crusting blood into the crevices of his smile. Gaius kept him like a pet afterward, dressing him in silks, and forcing him to serve wine with that carved smile, while guests recoiled and laughed. Something darker had begun to smolder, something colder than vengeance, something Roman. Speculus, silent and graceful, was his favorite. He simply watched. But silence in Rome was not a virtue. It invited suspicion. One night, Gaius grew drunk on a mixture of vinegar wine and crushed lotus petals, and in front of his sneering guests, he accused the boy of plotting treachery. The room fell silent. Then came the laughter, dry and cracked, and one guest, a provincial who had seen such punishments in Carthage, offered a suggestion. If he won't speak, carve him a mouth that never closes. A Roman centurion who never returned from war, or from lust perhaps, both. The boy grew up beneath the constant murmur of incantations and the raw stare of goats and ancestors. He was said to be beautiful, with a quiet demeanor that disturbed grown men and a laugh that made crows scatter. The name they gave him was Speculus, Latin for mirror, though he bore no reflection of joy. His face, permanently twisted into a smile, not of mirth, but of mutilation, became a spectacle at the dinner tables of senators. Speculus was thrown into a slave chain like a dog, but even as the others wept or cursed, the boy smiled, not out of defiance, not out of madness, but because he had seen something his mother's last whisper in his ear, perhaps something inevitable. Destiny is a brutal sculptor, a whisper in the sweat-drenched barracks of the gladiators, and finally, a symbol that Rome, in its infinite cruelty, could twist even the human soul into theater. Speculus was not born a slave. It was that laugh that condemned him. When the Romans came to collect taxes unpaid and punish villages too proud to bow, they took everything. His beauty, in the twisted morality of Rome, became his curse. They laughed. And so, under the sickly yellow light of Roman oil lamps, 4 men pinned the boy down. When the pain finally settled into his bones and his fever dreams receded, Speculus awoke not with screams, but with silence. But Speculus, they whispered, did not go mad, and waited, because deep inside that mutilated face, and so the mirror Speculus began to reflect Rome's cruelty back to itself. It began with whispers, then accidents, then disappearances. But Rome, as always, would not notice the rot until it reached the Senate. By the time the 3rd guest at Gaius Cassian's villa died choked on a grape, they claimed though the servants murmured of a thread soaked in oil and pulled tight as a garrote. Speculus had become invisible in plain sight. He poured wine, he bowed, he smiled, always smiled. The same smile he wore the night Decimus, Gaius's cousin, stumbled into the atrium drunk. She claimed he carried a demon inside him, that the gods carved his face to remind Rome of its sins. Grabbed Speculus by the chin and muttered, "Gods, it still smiles when it cries." Then he slapped him, and blood wet the edge of the carved grin once more. A poet named Plotianus tried to sketch his likeness and died of fever 3 nights later. They whispered that his smile was cursed, that those who looked too long into it saw their own madness reflected back. She believed if he spoke, Augustus himself would answer through his mouth. The guests sat in a circle of salt and wine. Candles flickered as if the walls themselves breathed. 3 days later, Decimus was found drowned in the fish pond, nor that of madness. It was deep, slow, and hollow like amphory cracking under the sea. The guests screamed. One woman clawed her own ears. Lucilla fainted. The slaves claimed the laurel tree outside bled black that night, water lilies blooming around his purpled face like mockery. They suspected nothing. Her sandals remained at the edge of the cliff behind her villa. The sea, as always, kept its secrets. After all, who would suspect the one who always smiles? Speculus lived within the fractures of Rome's grandeur, the marble facades, the perfumed halls, the velvet shadows of hypocrisy. And he remembered everything, every insult, every blow, every eye that looked at him not as a boy, where drunk senators and jaded patricians paid coin to see the smiling curse of the empire. They would ask him questions. He would only smile. They would try to provoke him. He never moved. They would laugh and leave unsettled. But as a grotesque amusement, a living satire of joy, he was made into a monster for Rome's pleasure. And now he wore the role with a stillness that terrified even the hardened kitchen slaves. But fate, with its cruel arithmetic, was not finished with him yet. One winter, Gaius Cassian's fortunes declined. A failed campaign in Gaul. He was a relic, a vessel, a mask with blood beneath, she said, tracing the scars on his cheeks with alabaster fingers. She renamed him Rhesus, Latin for laughter, and she dressed him in pale robes, paraded him during her rituals, sat him beside her, while nobles and mystics chanted over burning incense. "Smile for the dead," she whispered into his ear. "They envy the living." A bad investment in a gladiator school that burned mysteriously in the night. Desperate for favor, he gifted Speculus to the household of Lucilla Aemilanutha, widow of a powerful senator, known as much for her beauty as her fascination with the obscene and the divine. She kept mummified animals in her bedroom, bathed in milk laced with mercury, and held in her garden at midnight. She claimed to hear the voice of Augustus whispering through the laurel trees. To her, Speculus was not a slave. But Lucilla, for all her spiritual rot, recognized something few did beneath the permanent smile. There were eyes that did not forgive, and Rome began to notice. Children would weep at the sight of him. Senators crossed the street when he passed, but the boys said nothing. Not until the night Lucilla begged him to speak just one word during a where the air was thick with opium and goat blood. And then, with the carved corners of his mouth bleeding anew from the strain, Speculus finally opened his lips. He did not speak. He laughed. It was not the laughter of a child. By morning, Lucilla had vanished. Speculus was sold once more, this time not as a servant, but as an omen. Rome, you see, has always worshipped spectacle more than gods. They made him a symbol, a curiosity, a warning. He was placed in the Temple of Laphtaron, obscene theater, near the Subura district. Some said his silence echoed louder than Cicero's speeches, and yet his eyes watched and waited. Because even the blood of emperors could be made to laugh. It was Nero who finally summoned him. Of course it was. Nero, the emperor of fire and fiddle, who fancied himself a god of theater and thundered poetry across a city that only listened when burning. Rome had become a stage, and its people actors, dancers, and corpses. To Nero, laughter was power, and Speculus Rhesus, as the rumors still named him, was the greatest punchline of all. They brought him to the Domus Aurea, the golden house, that monstrous palace carved from Rome's own bones. He was led through colonnades that shimmered with mosaics of sea monsters and madness. So this, he whispered, circling the silent figure, is the boy who cannot weep, the grin that outlasts death. He believed the boy carried some secret, a divine mockery etched by the gods themselves. He summoned philosophers, surgeons, mystics. Nero demanded that Speculus speak. "You've heard my soul, haven't you?" he whispered, eyes fevered. "Tell me what you've seen in the hearts of my people. Tell me how the mob shall remember me. Can the mouth be un—" For the first time in years, he parted those bleeding lips and uttered two words. Others whispered that Nero refused to eat unless his food was first shown to the boys, still smiling, still alive, somewhere beneath the marble. Mothers warned their children, "If you lie, the smiling boy will come." Gladiators spat before matches to keep his gaze away. And the Senate, paralyzed in the face of Nero's rising madness, began to wonder whether the boy's silence was not a curse, but a prophecy. No chains, just a laugh echoing through the smoke, a sound that wasn't quite human. He asked one Greek physician, or perhaps carved further. His eyes widened, locked in the lower vaults of the palace, where mosaic floors turned to damp stone and the scent of incense gave way to mold and iron. No audience, no light, no laughter, then narrowed. Laughter, after all, was a double-edged sword. The boy's smile, fixed, eternal, was no longer an accessory. It became a mirror, a judgment. The emperor, who had turned Rome into a masquerade of madness, now found himself mocked by the one face that could never stop laughing. He touched the scarred mouth gently, almost reverently. "I envy you, child. You no longer need the approval of an audience. Past fountains that spouted wine instead of water, and gardens where slaves were dressed as nymphs and chained to trees for decoration." His eyes remained still, but something behind them flickered, a breath, a thought, a dagger, unsharpened. He dressed him in gold robes, adorned his neck with sapphires, and placed him beside the stage during his performances. Face split in eternal mirth, untouched by the heat. Others say it was only a statue melting. But one man, a former servant of Lucilla, claimed he saw Nero on his balcony, weeping, while a boy below smiled up at him, blood and soot streaking his face like war paint. While Rome's elite squirmed through Nero's interminable verses about Orpheus and lamenting stags, Speculus sat beside him, unmoving, always smiling. His face became the emperor's punctuation. Every bad joke, every cruel jab, was followed by the carved grin, grotesque applause that dared not change. Rome was rotting, and it stank of roses and sulfur. Nero greeted him like an artist beholding a masterpiece, Speculus said nothing. Nero, entranced, made him part of the palace's evening spectacles. The people began to murmur. Even the emperor needs a smile, not his own. But behind the scenes, the truth festered. Nero's interest deepened into obsession. One night, drunk on mandrake wine and his own reflection, and Speculus, against all expectation, leaned forward. They laugh. Nero recoiled, as if struck. He ordered Speculus to be removed from sight. But silence in Rome was never quiet. In the darkness, the legend grew. Some said the emperor began to hear that hollow laugh in his dreams. And the people, oh, the people, began to speak of him with a kind of fear, usually reserved for omens. Then came the fire. The night Rome burned, some claimed to see a figure standing amidst the flames, robed in gold. By dawn, half the city had crumbled, and the boy Speculus Rhesus, the mirror of Rome, was gone. No corpse, a sound that Rome would never forget. Rome survived, as it always did, by forgetting. After Nero's suicide alone, abandoned, throat half-cut by trembling hands, the city reshaped itself like a serpent shedding skin. The Domus Aurea was buried, its halls sealed beneath new temples and public baths, as if stone could suffocate memory. Children born with slits at the corners of their mouths, actors who forgot their lines the moment they mocked a fallen emperor, senators who died mid-laugh, choking on their tongues, eyes wide as if they had seen something in the shadows, something that grinned back. Statues of Nero were torn down, his name chiseled from monuments. But no one touched the temple where Rhesus once stood. No one dared. Stories spread of a figure wandering the dark, clad in rotted silk, eyes bright as embers, his face still carved, still bleeding, illuminated only by the torchlight of the mad and the lost. Some said he guided them out. No door, no inscriptions. His notes, preserved in the archives of Sapienza University, speak of dreams, of laughter behind walls, of voices in dead languages, telling jokes that made no sense till they did. 2 months later, Bellini locked himself in his study, painted a crude smile across his face with a shard of mirror, and burned all his notes. Just a hollow space behind the walls, forgotten by time. Inside, they found only one object, a bronze mask, smiling, grotesque, lifelike, the lips fused open, the cheeks slashed from corner to ear, and behind the mask, a skull with fine bone lines, of a boy no older than 15, a reflection not of Rome's cruelty, but of ours. Because the world never stops smiling at pain, it packages horror into amusement. It dresses agony in costume. It carves jokes into the bones of the broken and calls it history. Others said he whispered things that made them tear their own faces apart, trying to understand the joke, because even the forgetting could not silence the laughter. They said strange things began to happen in the years that followed. Written in Latin too old for his tongue, it read, "Sounds carry, and sometimes, if you stand alone at night, you hear it, that same hollow laugh, neither joyous nor cruel, just inevitable." And deep below the city, where old aqueducts ran dry and catacombs twisted like the entrails of a dying beast, the church came centuries later. The story of the slave with the carved face is a parable at best, a fable born of Rome's love for cruelty and spectacle. There are no records of a Speculus, temple to laughter, no clear proof of a boy who bled joy and silence. But legends, unlike records, do not decay. They rot, they ferment, and then they speak again. The bones of saints were stacked atop the bones of slaves, but even the bishops, wise in doctrine and fire, avoided one corridor in the undervaults of Saint Clemente. They said it echoed when no one spoke, that laughter traveled through its stones like breath through flutes. A monk once found a scrap of papyrus sealed in wax beneath a cracked altar. They found him smiling. He who carved joy into flesh shall wear sorrow as his crown. The monk tore out his own eyes. Historians today dismiss it, of course. In 1937, during renovations near the ruins of the Domus Aurea, workers discovered a sealed chamber. The archaeologists named it Risus Aeternus, the eternal smile. One of the researchers, a stern Italian named Vittorio Bellini, took it home to study. The mask was lost in the fire, but even today, in that wing of the university, they say the walls are thinner. Some believe the boy was a victim. Others believe he became a curse. And maybe, just maybe, that boy, the one with no name, no tears, no voice, was the first to show us. Maybe that's why we still can't look away, because somewhere, deep in the theater of time, he's still watching, still smiling, still waiting for the laughter to stop.